It's a pleasure for us at the Institute of International Education to be a content partner for the IC3 movement, and we're delighted to curate this special session for the IC3 Festival today and tomorrow. My name is Vivek Mansukhani, and I head IIE's operations in India. I'm based in New Delhi, and I'm joined today by a very eclectic and fantastic panel, including Dr. Ahmad M. Ezzeddine, Associate Vice President for Educational Outreach and International Programs, and also Senior Associate to the President, the Senior Initiatives at Wayne State University. My second panelist is Mr. Malik Sundaram, Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management and Dean of the Office of Global Services at Northeastern University. And finally, my dear colleague, Dr. Leah Mason, Research Lead in our Research Evaluation and Learning Department at the Institute of International Education, IIE, in New York. As you can probably see, there is a chat box which has been opened up and facilitated. You're welcome to type in your questions and comments right through the session, which is for 45 minutes. And at the end, we will spend a few minutes taking those questions and asking our panel members to address and respond to them. I'd like to kick off with a few comments before I pass on to my colleagues. So a bit of background and context setting to our session. The Institute of International Education, that's IIE, began its work to promote educational exchange right in the middle of the Spanish influenza pandemic of 1918-1920. Within a few months of its declared end, the number of international students coming to the US increased. American students studying abroad also grew. IIE has continued in its 100-year journey to promote educational exchanges through 10 more global and regional pandemics between 1957 and 2018. In the aftermath of each pandemic, international student enrollment and US study abroad resumed rapidly and even grew. Cut to where we are today. COVID-19 has become the main driver of who goes where. All host countries are dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic. All universities have had to switch to online instruction. The numbers of physically present students has come down for most host countries, and many students have deferred their plan to study abroad, both for short-term and long-term programs. However, interest remains strong for resuming exchanges as soon as it is safe to do so. Now, there are some things that our higher educational institutions cannot control, such as local health conditions, travel advisories, air services, student visas, banks and financial institutions remaining operational, quarantine policies, regulations, the rollout of the vaccines, etc., etc. But they do have a lot of impact on the other ingredients for resuming international education exchange. Higher education institutions can provide care for the international students who are already in the host countries. They can offer emergency grants to international students facing immediate problems, keeping residencies and labs open, offering on-campus jobs. International student advisors and officers have been working relentlessly to help students pivot to the new realities. Many newly admitted international students have had to remain in their home countries to pursue at least one online semester. However, interest in an on-campus experience and US degrees have not diminished. As one student observed, we know the pandemic will end, not our aspirations to complete our studies and receive our degrees. So ladies and gentlemen, we are at a critical point where the world aspires to untangle itself from the travesty of this pandemic. Global student mobility has been disrupted, perhaps more than ever. We have had to reframe and reinvent our understanding of global mobility. We've had to devise creative solutions and interventions to make education more equitable and sustainable. We have with us two wonderful leaders from the US higher education sector, Dr. Ezzeddine and Mr. Sundaram. It is our privilege and pleasure to bring them to you today to share their considerable experience. But before I engage in conversation with them, I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Leah Mason, to share some highlights from the Open Doors 2021 report on international educational exchange, as this will set the context for the new realities around global mobility and our ensuing discussions. Leah, over to you.
Since the release of the IIE IC3 and IC3 joint paper on student mobility flows, the fall 2021 semester has begun in the United States, and IIE released new data on international student enrollments for the 2020-21 academic year. As a result, I will share with you today the main themes of the paper, which address global student mobility, alongside updated information from the US perspective. Let me first begin with global mobility flows before COVID-19. So prior to the COVID-19 outbreak, The UNESCO Institute for Statistics reported that the total number of globally mobile international students had reached 6.1 million in 2019. We know that in many countries, while the number of international students had increased steadily through 2019, international students around the world and every country that hosted them were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. While the United States has just released data from the 2020-21 academic year, many leading host countries are at varying stages of data collection for this same comparable timeframe. So the data I'm speaking to now is pre-COVID. As the number of international students has grown over the past 20 years, the destinations of these students have shifted, reflecting increased global competition among countries that want to attract international students to their borders. The United States remains the top host country. However, as the number of countries hosting more than 2% of international students has increased, the United States market share decreased from 28% in 2000 down to 20% in 2020. This bar chart allows you to see the emergence of Canada, China, and Russia among the leading hosts. I now want to look at top senders of international students prior to COVID. China was the leading place of origin for international students, with almost 1 million students enrolled at higher education institutions outside their borders. The top 5 host destinations of international students from China host nearly 90% of Chinese students and include the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Japan. India was the second largest sender of international students, with almost 400,000 students enrolled at institutions primarily in Canada, the United States, and Australia. And while students from China and India made up more than 50% of the international students in most leading host countries, including the United States, these two countries still made up only 1/4 of all international students. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the traditional push and pull factors that we talk about in the international education field around global mobility centered on leading host countries' organized strategies and set recruitment targets to attract international students to their countries, often with the prospect of building a workforce pipeline with global talent. This has become increasingly competitive as more countries seek to host international students. And both students and host countries, and for both students and host countries, demographic shifts are a motivating factor. Declining birth rates in some countries has prompted a desire to attract global talent and build their workforce, while rising birth rates in other countries has led to limited capacity in higher education and a yearning for new or different job opportunities. While much remains the same in the COVID-19 era, we are beginning to see emerging themes and trends in global mobility. Let's start with some of the data from the United States. I will now review some of the open doors information on international students studying at US higher education institutions and on optional practical training. The Open Doors project collects comprehensive information on international students and scholars at US institutions and on US students studying abroad. The data collected through Open Doors comes from 4 different surveys, as you can see listed here. And today we will discuss the data from the International Student Census survey that was released on November 15th. The Open Doors International Census surveyed nearly 3,000 US higher education institutions that reported hosting international students in the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System, or SEVIS. This year, Open Doors 2021 adapted its definition of an international student to give the most comprehensive picture of international students studying at US higher education institutions. In Open Doors 2021, data on international students includes students enrolled at US institutions and taking classes in person on US campuses, online while in the United States, online from abroad, and finally, the data also includes students on optional practical training. I also want to share insight on the timeline reflected in Open Doors 2021. We collected data from US institutions as of fall 2020 to reflect the 2020-21 academic year. However, we note that the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic leading up to the fall 2020 semester impacted the data. Throughout the spring and summer of 2020, international student application and selection processes, as well as visa processes, were severely impacted by the pandemic. Further, international student travel was also restricted. As a result, the fall 2020 semester saw largely hybrid models in place, with approximately 20% of international students studying online from abroad, according to the fall 2020 International Student Snapshot. And now to the data for 2020-21. In the 2020-21 academic year, the United States welcomed 914,095 international students for study, a decrease of 15% from the previous year. The decrease was primarily due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the past 20 years, we have seen robust growth of international students in the United States. Most international students studied at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Over 75% of all international students were either undergraduate or graduate students. And over 200,000 students pursued optional practical training for the 4th consecutive year. Now, the total number of students from India has grown considerably over the last 10 years, peaking in 2018-19 at just over 200,000 students in 2020-21. The total number of students from India was 167,582, a 13% decline from the prior year, which is slightly less than the overall international student population decline. Taking a closer look at students from India by academic level over the past 10 years, we see that graduate students, who make up just under half of all Indian students at US institutions, decreased greater than the overall international graduate student population, decreasing 19%. In comparison, undergraduate non-degree students from India and those on OPT were affected at the same rate as the average decline by academic level or less. If we look at enrolled international students further, we can divide them into those who are studying for the first time at their US university, or new international students, and those continuing their studies. The number of new international students enrolling for the first time at a college or university fell to 145,528, reflecting a decrease of 46%. This was the primary driver of the overall decrease in international students. We see a better picture of international students continuing their studies, as the decrease among this group was just 3%, in line with the decrease we saw last year, for example. This indicates that international students who were already enrolled at US universities were committed to continuing their education. This year, international students came from over 200 places of origin. The top 3 places of origin continue to be China, India, and South Korea. China and India make up 53% of the total international student population in the United States. As we include the top 25 places of origin and beyond, we begin to see international students representing other regions, including Latin America, Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. International students are welcome to study at US universities across the country. California, New York, and Texas continue to be the top 3 destinations for international students. As we include more states, we see that international students study at US higher education institutions in every region across the country. The top US host states of students from India is similar to the overall international student population. These 5 states host nearly half of all students from India. Next, let me share some of the data on fields of study. As in previous years, most international students, 54%, study in STEM fields, primarily engineering and math and computer science. Engineering remains the most popular major for international students, with 1 in every 5 students pursuing studies in this field. Students pursuing math and computer science and business and management were in the 2nd and 3rd spot. In contrast, a greater majority of Indian students, 78%, study in the STEM fields, with more than 1/3 studying math and computer science and another 1/3 studying engineering. I now want to touch on some of the findings from IIE's Fall 2021 International Student Enrollment Snapshot. The snapshot presents current international student enrollment patterns for the 2021-22 academic year from over 860 US higher education institutions. We found that the total number of international students, all enrolled and OPT, increased by 4%. This is a rebound from the 15% decrease due to the COVID-19 pandemic in fall 2020. We continued to include international students at US campuses, as well as those online in the US and abroad in this total. US institutions are committed to international student outreach and recruitment, and US institutions are continuing to prioritize international student outreach to India and China and to international students at US high schools. In contrast to 2020, 99% of responding institutions are holding classes in person in fall 2020 or implementing a hybrid model. Only 1% of institutions are offering online classes only in fall 2021. At least 65% of the reported international students are on campus in the United States. And as a result, US institutions also shared with us the many supports in place for international students right now in fall 2021. This graph shows the focus on students' well-being and associated support services alongside continuous support for virtual and hybrid coursework and activities. Now, many of the traditional push and pull factors that we look at in relation to global academic mobility remain more relevant than ever as students and institutions reassess the value of an international degree and reflect on how higher education is delivered and experienced in the COVID era. Recent studies report that students are prioritizing health and safety in their selection of where to study. However, as borders open in some countries, mode of instruction is an increasingly persuasive factor for students, with some eager to participate in in-person coursework in a host country, and others taking advantage of the opportunity to pursue studies at a desired institution without the financial burden of travel and accommodations outside of their home country. We know from IIE's COVID Snapshot series and similar surveys conducted by IIE's Project Atlas partner that the impact on student mobility has been felt around the world. At the student level, short-term exchange programs were disrupted. Some have now resumed, while others remain paused. Continuing international enrollments remained stable as new international student enrollment declined. The International Association of Universities Global Survey reported on the effects of the pandemic on institutions, noting it has been very uneven between different regions of the world and also between different institutions in the same world region. However, institutions globally have and are continuing to adapt and innovate in support of international mobility. IIE continues to hear from our global partners that students and the institutions that host them, that international students remain interested and are motivated to seek out higher education opportunities abroad. That concludes my portion, and I will now turn it over to Vivek.
Thank you so much, Leah, for all that data, all the evidence, which really tells us about what's been going on in the last 2 years. So I'm going to turn the focus now on our wonderful panelists, Ahmad and Malik. And the first question is to both of them, and I'm going to start with Ahmad, if I may. So in the context of what we've just heard, what have been some of the key learnings, some takeaways around global mobility in these last 2 years, particularly for your university, Wayne State University, and of course, Northeastern University? Ahmad, would you like to go first?
Sure. Good evening, good morning, greetings from Detroit. I am Ahmad Ezzeddine. I'm the Associate Vice President here at Wayne State University. And just for context, Wayne State is a comprehensive urban research institution in Detroit. We have 26,000 students from across the country and the world, more than 1,100 students, about 200, more than 250 from India alone. So we are the motor city. We have 13 schools and colleges. So engineering is prominent. We have medical school, law, business, etc. And the last 2 years certainly have tested us on multiple levels. We and our students have faced many challenges, but in the process, we learned a lot. I think while mobility and international students numbers have were negatively impacted, as we heard I just heard from Leah. There were also bright spots when it comes to engaging with students and partner institutions. I think now no one can question how interconnected we are as a global community, which also puts international education and its importance at the forefront of what we do. So that really has catalyzed the efforts here, our efforts at the university to really highlight the importance of our international students and the importance of the global work that we do and the connections that we have across the globe. We learned the hard way. I think one of the biggest lessons we learned the hard way of the need to be nimble. I mean, I think flexibility, we had to switch overnight all of our operations, all our programs to online, working with our international students and, and partners. That meant working across time zones and while we did this occasionally before, now it was the mode of operation for everything we did. And so we really needed to accommodate. And we did this. Sometimes we learned the hard way how to do that. Working also remotely forced us to really look at our processes and where are the needs to improve them. So for instance, back in fall of 2020, we could not, many students could not make it because of the travel restrictions. So they had to defer their admissions. When they tried it, we discovered that our system was not that simple and needed to be simplified. So that's something forced us to look at the process of simplifying the deferral process. Something as simple as this we took for granted before because we had occasionally one or two students who may need it and it wasn't a big deal, but now needed something, a lot of it more attention. But also we had to pay attention to our international students on campus who were currently enrolled and who were with us when the pandemic started and meet and support their needs. When the pandemic started, we were also dealing with some immigration issues that students had to deal with that added a lot of stress. The financial stresses that many of them faced because also of the closures, because of what was happening in their home countries. For us here, we are on the border with Canada. We had to deal with border closures because we had a lot of commuting students. So how do we deal with those students and support them? So it required that we engage with them and support them differently and more often. We had to mobilize more members of our university community and staff to engage with us in supporting our students, both the current and the prospective students. I'll stop here and then I'll come back after.
Malik, would you like to continue from your perspective?
Great, thank you, Vivek, and thank you, Ahmad. Good morning, everyone, or good evening. For many of them connecting from different parts of the world. As Vivek had introduced, Malik Sundaram with Northeastern University. I'm excited to be here with all of you and share this session and thoughts. As far as Northeastern University, a quick introduction. Northeastern is a global university system with close to 12 campuses. We are located in 3 continents, UK, Canada, and the US. US being our mothership campus in Boston. We host close to 20,000 students between all our campuses, 20,000 international students between all our campuses. And we are a global university that operates in a global mindset as well as a global intake structure. So as Ahmad had shared, the last 2 years have been a very interesting learning for all of us, as we have large number of students who are global in our campuses. We had to pivot very quickly on how we prepare and how we support students. We had close to 5,000 to 7,000 students who had to leave the country within a day when the university shut down. So we had to quickly mobilize the support infrastructures that we created for them. The learnings that we had in preparing for it was tremendous. The story I will always remember through my life is in December, Dr. Alex Vaspiani, who's one of our professors who does predictions for the White House, for pandemic-related disease spreads. Invited us for a conference, and he started sharing about what's happening in different parts of the world, with pockets changing of impacts from the pandemic, and how this could spread throughout the world and bring the changes that we are seeing today. And I asked for myself, is it all going to be real? Or are we really looking at 2 years of a pandemic that we're going to deal with? Which I was in a denial and sitting in that meeting, and I had shared the same denial with my leadership as well. But we are in the reality today, dealing with those. But fortunately, we were starting to prepare our infrastructures way ahead in supporting our students with online learning, as many of our institutions have did in US, supporting mobility for students who can arrive to the campus, and also providing customer support while they were at their home countries, which was tremendous. Our volume of customer service went up from 6,000 touch points we had with international students to 26,000 touch points within a month. We had to double up of our staff. We had a lot of burnouts with our employees where they have to stay late hours to support our students. So with all these, I think it has created a lot of agility among all of our staff, created a lot of innovations that we would have never expected to have innovation at such short period of time, and forced us towards those innovative opportunities. And we are looking to see how we sustain those innovations that we were able to gain through this pandemic, and also the support infrastructures that we have been able to create for a mobile and global student student force that we work with. So I look forward in continuing our conversation and sharing more about what we did and how we did it as we discuss through this panel.
Thank you, Malik. So I think we've had to turn around the definition of global mobility quite a bit, thanks to what's been going on the last 2 years. So in your own few words, I mean, what does global mobility now mean for you? What does it resonate? How does it resonate? And you've mentioned some innovations and student recruitment, particularly attracting, engaging, retaining them. So one or two top strategies that you might like to share in a nutshell. So I'll start with you, Ahmad, and then the same question to Malik.
Yeah, mobility is really, I think, the way I look at mobility now, I look at it from, and personally, from the context of global education and what global education and global learning means. Really, how do we educate and provide students in general with the global competencies, in addition to learning engineering and business, and so how do we equip them with the global competencies to deal with the complexities of the world we live in? And for that, we have to really embed and interact and work differently and use the technologies and the resources that are at our disposal in different ways. So what I mean, technology, we learned to use it in ways that we had not considered before because of the pandemic. It forced us to look at it, right? Working remotely for us has presented some great opportunities. To give you an example, on the recruiting front, from September 2020 to April 2021, we recruited in 55 countries. We would not have gone, probably at best, we would have probably hit 5 or 6 countries in that time period in a normal situation. We have gone virtual to countries we've never gone before. We had 39 virtual fairs and a series of webinars and meetings with prospective students and counselors from many countries. And as a result, we have now students from more than 80 countries, while historically, until the pandemic, we've never had more than like 70. So we just added 10 countries just in the last 2 years. We have students from 10 new countries in the last 2 years because of what we have done. And even on campus, we had in that same period, we had more than 7,600 interactions with our international students who were on campus. Again, that level of interaction, that personalized service, that personalized contact is now part of what we do, where it wasn't before. It was really kind of mass production type engagement. Now we are really trying to the best we can, tailor our communication and interactions with our current and prospective students differently. And we had, I mean, I think you had to pay attention also to the needs. I'm going back to the challenges that our students faced last year, some of the interventions that we had to use. I mean, on the financial front, the U.S. government provided a lot of support for domestic students. Those stimulus funding did not apply to international students, and while they do pay a lot more money than our domestic students for our tuition, right? So as an example here, we took it upon ourselves, the executive leadership at the university took a pay cut, and the money from those pay cuts was used to provide emergency funding for our international students if they needed them. And then on the academic side, we launched now, and we have this, we started to kind of a way of engage, but it is becoming part of what we do on a regular basis, a series of events and webinars to highlight work that our faculty are leading in different areas that we do in India and different parts of the country, with working with counselors or schools or organizations like IIE, just to highlight what it means to be an engineer. What are some new technologies that are emerging, some few programs that are emerging, where we can really it's an opportunity for both our faculty and staff to interact with prospective students, and for those prospective students and their counselors to learn more about us, about the university. And some of that work is really going and happening virtually. So we're doing on the mobility, the traditional study abroad. I mean, now I'm sure you've all heard about the virtual exchanges that are taking place. That has become a very big part of what we are doing. And that's how actually what we have done over the last 2 years, because study abroad came to a screeching halt and now starting to recover a little bit. So we had really to adapt, and I think I see this as an opportunity to continue. This is going to continue moving forward. It's not going to end now if things get back to quote unquote normal.
Thank you so much. Malik?
Great. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Ahmad. Very, very similar to what Ahmad had explained with our institution as well. I will highlight some of those differences that we have seen as well. We have students from 143 countries between all our campuses. So recruitment from all these source countries was a challenge. Everything was shut down. The contact we could have with students, counselors, counseling partners like many of you were very limited. So we have to innovate very quickly to see how we communicate through emails and support continued presence to parents. So we did close to 1,600 or 1,600 fairs that were all virtual around the world. So we have close to 30 staff members who are dedicated to doing global recruitment. So they were all pretty much stopped their travel. All the time that they saved from flights were utilized to connect with students and parents to keep them engaged and support. There were close to 30% of our enrollment dropped during the pandemic year, which means there are a lot of parents and students are looking for support to do deferral processes, not sure how they're going to pivot for that 1 year, whether they're going to continue holding patterns or they're going to start engaging online. So there were a lot of conversations and support needs that we had to create for students and parents immediately that will elevate some of their concerns. The third, what we saw, which was largely was the interest towards online learning. We have never seen that interest in the past. We had close to 1,700 learners on our graduate level who engaged completely online throughout the pandemic year. And we had close to 380 that are engaged online currently. So what this shows was that most students did want to come to campus as quickly as possible. but they did not hesitate to engage online when there was a necessity for it. We also did the same at the undergraduate level. So we had around 600 students who are engaged online. We created something called as Global Connections. As we all know, the first year experience is so precious for freshman students coming into the campus and being on campus and being the first year life that they would have away from their classrooms or away from their parents and home. So I think we try to create as much of those connections and experience online. As we know, there are difficulties to make everything possible. As I always tell my students, you learn more from outside the classroom and being in that location than inside the classroom. So the experience was very hard to create, but we did our best with what we can. The one last statistics that I would share that's very promising is, even though we saw 30% decrease in our enrollments in 2020, in fall 2021, we saw 121% increase. So all the students who did not make it in 2020 did make their way to 2021 in the fall term. So the interest for US as a destination continues, particularly from India. The only area where we are still seeing challenges for students coming here is professional learners. As you know, many of these professional learners are in their jobs, and they usually would like to secure their visas before they quit their jobs to go to study abroad. So there is a limbo between not being able to secure their visas on time to be able to make their travel plans. So we have seen a large decrease in the professional learner population, where they are taking their time to make sure they get their visas before they get here. But otherwise, we have been seeing a lot more interest for students to get here as quickly as possible as they start engaging online as well.
Thank you so much, Malik. I mean, continuing our conversation of the renewed meaning and understanding of global mobility, you know, one viewpoint is that students don't need to leave their home country to get a global perspective. And another viewpoint is that remote study does not offer the same opportunities for kind of cultural immersion as living and learning abroad in another international setting. So my question to you first, Malik, and then to Ahmad, switching it around a bit. So how can higher education institutions and counselors in particular, who are the main audience for IC3, equip themselves to be able to help students to navigate this ever-changing landscape, you know, this new reality? So any thoughts on that? Just a couple of minutes each, and then we are coming to a conclusion.
Great, thank you, Vivek. I think that's a great view of looking at what's next, right? When we are moving into this new world of operations. I think the one thing we would certainly say is the purpose of this study abroad is more and more important and deeper than ever before. Northeastern being an experiential learning institution, close to 93% of our students participate in co-op opportunities. Being at an employer, being able to work at an employer and have the exposure of career opportunities or career growth that they're going to see even during their educational experience here. So those educational experiences are hard to replicate. The global experiences are hard to replicate online. So I think going back to looking at the purpose of global education and the impact of global education that the students will have was very important for parents and students to understand, and the counselors are very important in this to make them see the difference of educational experiences with less educational pedagogy that they're going to earn or gain from their classrooms. So I think that that's where the importance of education will come through, or global education will come through. At the same time, as a parent, you're going to be hesitant to send your child 20,000 miles, 20,000 miles apart, or 6,000 miles apart, to be away from your home country and be engaged in education. So a lot of institutions like us have invested heavily on keeping their students safe on campus. That's our top priority, to make sure every student getting here is safe and secure. So giving that comfort to parents will be the counselor's topmost priority in educating them through those efforts that the institutions are making.
Thanks, Malik. Ahmad?
Quickly, I think it's really another question of an either or. Either you travel or you do online. It's really and we have to invest in both. We know the numbers of students who are engaged in mobility and studying abroad and spending, getting degrees abroad is still small and is not available to everybody. So how can we supplement and complement that and provide opportunities for those who cannot make it for whatever reason to travel and study abroad, give them those opportunities. And I think this is what is exciting about what's coming, and where we all in this field, in this profession, can engage in developing these opportunities and these collaborations and these rethinking how do we create new models that can allow for more of these engagements. So you cannot go travel for your full degree. Maybe you do half of your degree overseas, or and how you collaborate with project-based learning, as Malik mentioned, their experiential learning. I mean, that could be virtually. We have a lot of our students are going to be working in global companies. So they're going to be working, we have our graduates here who finish from, are employed at General Motors, for instance, but they're working with colleagues from all over the world. So how do we equip those students to work with and learn and to be able to operate in that world? And that's, I think, our role as educators, our role as counselors, is really seek and develop those opportunities for us to kind of expand those chances.
I think I would have loved to continue this discussion. It's fascinating, and there's so many ideas, innovations, but in the interest of time, I'm going to give each of you three, so Malik, Ahmad, and Leah, just a minute each to wrap up on your final thoughts about how we would revitalize global student mobility. Anything that you may not have covered earlier, just a closing thought, and then I'll wrap up after Leah. So Malik?
Yeah, I will start with us institutions. As Ahmad said, we are stepping back and looking at what we should do different to make access and mobility as easy as possible for students. Being test optional is a trend that we are seeing with most institutions, trying to move away from standardized tests and really working with students to what they bring as their talents. We have looked at test optional as a requirement that we would have moving forward. We have challenge exams where students can establish their talents and knowledge for a program before they actually have to take a course. So these are new innovations that institutions are looking at to make it accessible and to support global mobility. I think it is very important for any institution that's working on this space on seeing what influence an international student and a diverse classroom can bring for their learning, and that continues to be one of the investments that all of us are making to make this as easy as possible for our international students.
Thanks. Ahmad?
For us, one initiative that we are launching here and we have been really pushing is global learning for all. We want global education to be part of everybody's, every student who comes to the university, and that we want that to be a focus for them. We want to expose them to a global opportunity, to have them build their global competencies. And if we do that, I think that will continue to help promote this mobility, not just one way to the US, but really across the globe, and forces us to think differently beyond just the traditional models that we know work, but they don't work for everybody. And we need to think of alternative ways to really address and reach and provide this very important, valuable education to everyone who comes through our campuses.
Thanks. Leah?
Yes, thank you, Vivek. I think this is a wonderful question. And as I think about our future and think about what we have heard today from Ahmad and Malik, I really think that we are now seeing a future of mobility where in-person, hybrid, and virtual are these three options. It's no longer two, right? There's sort of three, this hybrid option. And so I'm intrigued to see how institutions and students will leverage technology to an advantage, to enrich the in-person experience in new and different ways. Technology will no longer be the fallback. It's not a replacement. It's not a second choice, but I think there are ways to enrich the learning for the in-person experience by leveraging technology. Now, with that, putting my research hat back on, is that challenge of how do we track hybrid exchange, right? We're just embarking on tracking virtual exchange, and while we have been tracking the in-person mobility at IIE more than 100 years now, tracking hybrid exchange will be new and different from the research perspective, but equally as important.
Thank you, Leah. Well, the good news is that we all want international educational exchange to resume. And the even better news is that students continue to aspire to have that opportunity. So therefore, just to wrap, I'd like to say that educational institutions need to remain resilient, committed, optimistic. Planning for and implementing the 21-22 academic year and beyond gives us all a chance to open academic doors wider than ever before. And so far, no pandemic has caused us to do otherwise. With special thanks to Leah, to Ahmad and Malik, and to IC3 for organizing this brilliant festival. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you found this session useful. Bye-bye and take care.
Thank you all.